All right, they've closed the door. Let's get started. So welcome to Take a Trip with Tableau Travel and Expense. My name is Mike Crook, and I'll be your captain for this journey today. Assisting me is my first officer, Dan Liang. So before we take off, I'd like to introduce your crew. So I took on my first data analytics role in probably 2001, and I was responsible for reporting on everything from headcount and time tracking to expense variance and IT service allocations for a CIO at an insurance company. In 2007, I discovered Tableau and spent the next 4 years trying to change how IT was looking at its data. In 2011, I joined Tableau and was responsible for building single source of the truth dashboards for our executive team, and then helping finance get to their data. I now work with a team of analysts, and we help finance and the rest of Tableau see and understand their data. When I'm not in the office, I'm most likely cheering on my son or daughter at a soccer game. In the winter, I'll be trying to escape and hit the slopes. And in the spring, I'll be analyzing the data from my girls' fast-pitch softball team. Dan considers himself a reformed financial analyst. He joined Tableau in 2014 and was the first analyst on my team. He's been instrumental in the growth and adoption of our finance published data sources and is the architect behind our current solution for analyzing our Concur data. When he's not helping Tableau see and understand their data, he's spending time with his family and friends, trying to find where he hit his golf ball, playing video games, and analyzing some of his own personal data. Let's get this trip started. So what is T&E? Most of you know that from being here today, but some people will think of it as travel and expense. Others will call it travel and entertainment expense. They're really the same thing. But T&E is typically comprised of airfare, lodging, transportation, and meals expenses. And for many of your organizations, T&E is going to be your second largest operating expense after your salaries. Now, all of us in this room incurred T&E to be here. And regardless of the size of your organization, I'm sure there's somebody back in your office that's going to care how much you spent on this trip. Dan and I have spent the last 2 years exploring Tableau's travel and expense data. We're excited to have this opportunity to share with all of you how we did it and some of the lessons that we've learned along the way. So we're going to start our trip with an overview of travel and expense and identify some of the questions that you're not able to answer with your current analytics. Our first stop, we're going to explore Agencia and begin to answer some of these questions. In our next stop, we're going to explore the wonders of Concur and provide you with some additional answers. And then no trip is complete without something to take home, and we have gifts for all of you. And since this is a trip, you're welcome to take pictures, but know that all this is being recorded and you'll be able to review it when you get back at the office. And as we near the end of our trip, we'll highlight some of the other incredible resources that are available to you, and then we'll end our journey with an opportunity to reflect on everything that we've seen. So as this slide is saying, all the cool pictures that you're going to see here were provided by Tableau finance employees from personal trips that they've all taken. One of the things I want to talk about here at the beginning is what we call the T&E aggregation funnel. So your T&E data is feeding into your general ledger from multiple sources. It's going to be journal entries being booked by your accounting team, your bills, purchase orders, invoices. They're all feeding into your general ledger. Well, all the expenses are going to be in your general ledger, but unfortunately, you're losing a level of detail. You may not know the airlines that were on your tickets, or how many nights you stayed in a hotel, or the rental car type that your employees are using. So the data in your GL is enough for some of that high-level analysis, but it can't support all of your analytics needs. So let's take a look at a couple of examples of what you can do with your T&E data and start to highlight some of the questions that you're not able to answer. So here's a standard crosstab, something you might do in Excel, and obviously it's easy to do inside of Tableau as well. And here you can see the actual and the budget around our T&E expenses, and we've blended in the FTE counts so that we can have some additional metrics. In the upper right corner, the user has quick ability to select the period of time that they want to look at, and then the departments that they want to include. Now this again is great for a high-level summary, but it's really hard to see a trend or a pattern that's in your data. Now this one shows the actuals and the budget and the variance as well, and allows us to actually start to see a bit of a trend or a pattern in the information. The bars have been unstacked, so you can see each of the measures. You can quickly find the months that were unfavorable, but unfortunately, if you added subtotals at the quarter or the year level, your scale is going to be thrown off. So what other options do we have? Now, if you want to quickly see how your T&E budget is doing, this heat map might do the trick. The text is showing the variance, not only from a dollar, but from a percentage. The tooltips would show you the actual and the budget that's being used for that calculation. And the colors allow you to see the trend or the pattern that's occurring over time. And by using this chart type, you can add those quarter-to-date and the year-to-date totals. I mean, any of us that have done enough budgeting, you know you can't plan that stuff perfectly. You hope it's going to happen in March, but maybe it happens in April, and now you have a variance. Well, you only have a variance in those 2 months, but that variance in those 2 months now crossed a quarter. And so by having those quarter-to-date and the year-to-date variances can really be helpful to see if you're course correcting. And we can see that here. That second team has been unfavorable for almost every period in the year. But the rest of the teams started out unfavorable, and through course correction, we can see that they were able to make adjustments, and by the end of the year, they were under budget and in the green. Now, this T&E tracker doesn't have the budget information in it, but it does provide additional insight into our T&E data. Because often in your general ledger, you might have separate GL accounts that are breaking up some of your travel expenses. So here we can look at the airfare and the lodging, and then we've brought in the per FTE rates over time. Regardless of whether your organization is in high growth or hopefully not, but maybe in an extreme cost-cutting situation, being able to see the per FTE rates is a critical measure. It's a simple way to normalize your T&E spend for more accurate tracking. Now, it's very important to see our T&E and how it's doing and identify areas of variance or trends. But often we're going to find ourselves saying, I have more questions. So all of you are here because you're looking for answers. So let's take a couple minutes and can you share with us what some of your questions are that you have around your T&E data? Please. Anybody? Please, yes.
One of the big concerns we have are our employees that issue refunds and then they take the credit for themselves.
Okay, so tracking refunds, whether they're pocketing that money for themselves. Okay, any other questions? Perfect. Nights in hotels. Anything else? Okay. So I have some already here for you. So who are my top travelers? Are my travelers booking out of policy? Because out of policy is going to cost your organization more money. How far in advance are they booking those airline tickets? If you can get your employees to be 14 days or more, you're going to save a lot of money in your organization. And then who are your top vendors? You can use this with your purchasing and your travel departments, but if you're using corporate travel agencies like Agencia and Concur, you might be able to negotiate rates with them or go directly to those vendors if you're hosting events. And then what are my top market pairs? How often are we flying between Seattle and Austin? And what are some of the cheaper airlines or tickets that we could purchase that could make those same trips? And then here's some questions that you may not be thinking about, but by the size of your organizations, you probably should be. Do you have personal or corporate tax implications for the travel that's being done by your employees? How long they spend in certain states or in certain countries can generate tax implications for your employees or your organization. And we never want to think of this, but in the case of emergency, where are your employees? We have 2,000 employees in Austin right now. If something were to happen, we'd want to know who was here. And then most importantly, and this was really critical for Tableau over the last couple of years, is we were flying employees to a lot of different places. And through that analysis, we were able to decide, we need an office in Austin. We're flying so many people from Seattle to the East Coast or down into the South. And by having some of them centrally located in Texas, it was easier to make those travel arrangements, and they're spending less time in an airplane. So at this stop on our trip, we're going to explore a little bit about how you can get your data from Agencia. Now, when I walked through the room before we started, it didn't sound like too many of you are using Agencia, but hopefully the information in here will apply to you even if you're analyzing your travel data from other systems. We're going to show you some of the ways that you can start to answer those questions that we just revealed. And we'll share with you some of the lessons that we've learned and hopefully help you do so as well. So since I wasn't able to talk to all of you before we started, how many of you are using Agencia? All right, 4, 5, 6, okay, good. So a few more than we had yesterday, awesome. So regardless, again, of whether or not you're using Agencia or not, as long as you have travel data, this section's going to help you and show you some of the ways that you could be looking at that information. With any project, you hope to have a goal. Well, our goal when we started to analyze our data from Agencia was, we're Tableau. We want everything. We want to be able to have all of the information that's available to us from Agencia so that we could see and understand our travel data. And this wasn't going to be easy for us. And the reason why it wasn't going to be easy for us was because of our growth. We started using Agencia US in 2013, and now we have employees booking travel in 9 different Agencia sites. So to overcome this challenge, we had to evolve our solution to be as low touch as possible. It was okay when we only had 1 Agencia site, but once we had 9, we couldn't have a manual process of pulling that information from all of them. So in our current solution, the CSV files are running on a schedule on Agencia, and we're able to download those using a Selenium and Python script. Then we're using Alteryx to standardize these CSV files, and then once those files are ready, we're loading them with an SSIS job from the LAN into SQL Server tables. Now, there still are some manual steps along this way, and I'll talk about how we're going to hopefully automate those in the future. So if you are going to create your own ETL solution for Agencia, what are some of the steps or decisions that you might need to make? Well, the first and most obvious one, before you can analyze anything in Tableau, is you have to get to the data. So for Agencia, you have to use their online reporting tool. They do not have a reporting API available yet. But for those of you that are Agencia customers, help us push their roadmap. So you can only run standard reports or custom reports off of Agencia today. They do have a feature that I mentioned that allows you to schedule those reports, so you can decide if you want to get them every day, once a week, once a month, once a quarter, whatever is appropriate for your organization. And once that report is run, it's available to download from the download center, and then you have to decide how you want to download that file. So we used to manually do that. My analyst would log in every Monday morning, download the 4 files that we needed from that site, log into the next one, download those. But by using that Selenium and Python script, with a single push of a button, we're now able to log in to all 9 of those sites, download those files with the single push of a button. And that's over 40 files that we're downloading. But once you've downloaded those files, do you need to prepare them? Now, hopefully not, but if you do, pick the right tool or process for you. So right now, we're using the Alteryx process or designer as a means of preparing these files, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means here in a minute. And we used to use Windows PowerShell. So when we say prepare the files, what we mean by that is we want to back up the original file. So anytime you're doing any manipulation of the file, right, you want to have the backup so you don't have to go and download it again in case you mess things up. So we're backing up that file, and the Alteryx process automates that for us. Then we need to normalize the custom fields, and I can't stress this enough. If you are going to move beyond one instance of Agencia, make sure your admins are thinking about this, okay? Because if you rename a custom field in Agencia, the back end basically replicates that field, and now you have two fields. One that was used for the previous reporting, and now the new one that you're going to use going forward. So for those of you that have done any sort of ETL processing or loading of data, adding new columns and changing of columns is a bad thing. It causes stuff to break. So by using the Alteryx workflow, we're able to kind of normalize those column names and make sure that our file formats aren't changing. Now, the other challenge that you have is that sometimes the data is going to come in and it's slightly different than you had expected. When we built out our SQL Server database, we made some assumptions. We thought a field was only going to be 50 characters long. And so we set up the field to only store 50 characters. We didn't want to store that extra empty space. Unfortunately, as Agencia and our travel has evolved, some of those fields became 60 characters long. And now our load process was failing because of that. And so while we're trying to work with our entire IT organization to get those fields increased, as a stopgap, we needed to find a way to just truncate that file. And Alteryx made it available to us to do that as well. And then one of the other unknown issues we've had is we made assumptions as well in the databases. We never expected a field to ever be blank. And unfortunately, it occurred. And so the database was set to not allow null values, and then again, the load process failed. So again, we were able to rapidly change our Alteryx process, reproduce the CSV file, and then it was able to load without issues. And then some of the other things that we're doing is if you are creating an automated process, your file name can't change. It makes it harder if it does. So we're just using a simple rename of that file, so it's always called current or import or something like that. So just again, that the process always can assume a particular file name. And then we're copying the files from this processing folder into a production folder that then the SSIS package is pulling from. So then you have to decide, now that you've gotten the files and prepared the files, do you need to store the data? Again, this all depends on your organization and how much information that you have. When you're running the Agencia reports, the longest period of time that a report can have is 365 days. So if you're okay with just the current year or a rolling 365 days, you may not need to store the data. But if you want multiple years of data, you're going to have to come up with a solution. So we used to use Access as a means of just kind of unioning all of that or just storing it. We're using the SQL Server database to do that in a database that we call the Travel Master. Now, some of you might be thinking, hey, in Tableau 10, didn't they introduce a union feature? Well, yes, we did, and you could use that for this solution. As long as, again, your files were of the same format and you could easily union them together inside of Tableau, and you wouldn't then have to store them somewhere. So the Travel Master database, I'll just kind of talk briefly a little bit about what it looks like. So we're importing only the air, car, and hotel data from Agencia. There's some other information that we're not loading yet, but we hope to in the future. And then we're bringing all that data, so it's being loaded into separate tables, and then we're bringing it all together into one big master view. So we're bringing the common fields. The transactions over all three of those travel types have common fields. Transaction date occurs in all three of those files. So you only need to really store it once. And then you have your custom reporting fields if you set them up. And then we're bringing in the air, the car, and the hotel data. And so it gets to be kind of wide, but at least all of the data is in a single view. And so that allows us to do all of our reporting of the Agencia data with a single view. We don't have to data blend it together and worry about trying to figure out how to join across the different travel types. And while some users inside of Tableau have the ability to connect directly to the SQL Server database, what we wanted to do is use a published data source. So that way we can leverage some of the capabilities of Tableau to make it easier for us to monitor and support our business partners. And I'll talk a little bit more of that here in a minute. So once you have all of your Agencia data ready, you can begin to leverage the power of Tableau. So as you can see there on the left, that's our published data source. It's up there on Tableau Server by the little icon. And we've leveraged the foldering feature to make it easier for the users to navigate through the data that's in there. And I'm not showing it here, but if you hovered over any of the fields, we've added comments that explain what those fields are. And if there's any fields that we calculated, we explain why that calculation was done. Again, to try and, again, make the adoption within our organization easier. So now that we're ready to see the data in a Tableau, let's explore some of the ways that you could look at it and answer some of those T&E questions that you couldn't inside of your general ledger. So here is a dashboard that provides you with a summary of your air, hotel, and car data, and it begins to answer more of those questions that your general ledger couldn't. As you look at this, you start to wonder things like, is there a trend or a pattern in the number of car rental days? With our air travel, what is our online booking adoption? Because Agent Assist is going to cost us more money. And what was our average nightly room rate? To begin to understand your travel data, this is the type of information that you're going to need. This dashboard also summarizes the travel expenses, and it allows us to explore the data in a different way. We now can look at it from a region perspective, as well as the type of travel. And it allows us to answer even more questions. We now have insight into who the top vendors are: the hotel chains, the airlines, and the car rental companies. Is there seasonality to the travel? And here you can see there's a big spike in the middle of the year. Perhaps we had a Tableau conference. What is the distribution of that travel by region? Tableau is an international organization. We have employees in the US and in Europe as well as in Asia. And we want to see how the travel is distributed over those different regions. One of the cool techniques that we use in this dashboard may not be obvious to some of you, but what we did is we used the color legends as a means of filtering. So if you clicked on air, all of the information in this dashboard would be filtered to just the air travel. And I didn't have to go to another dashboard to do that. And if I wanted to then further divide the data down to just the US or the UK travel, I would be able to do that as well with a single click. And so when you're trying to build out dashboards, the challenge that we all have is real estate. How big can I make or how small can I make this dashboard and have it be functional but not lose a lot of real estate and filters? And this is one of the creative ways that you could be able to do that. So now we're doing a deeper dive. We saw the summary, but as with any travel analysis, we end up at the employee level. So by looking at the data in this way, we can see our regions and our cost centers, but now we start to get insight into who some of our top travelers are. Here we're just using some like employee ID, but we can quickly see by sorting it who our top travelers are. And by selecting on them on this viz, we now would be able to see their distribution of travel and get some greater insights into that. We also can see when our employees are traveling. And with the stacked bar charts, we get a distribution, a visual representation as well, of just how much of it is in air and car and hotel. And with any travel, the travel is likely occurring in a different period of time than the expense is going to be hitting your general ledger. And so for the accountants in here, you'll know that that's an issue because you have to accrue for those types of expenses, especially if they get large enough. The other thing we have is we have insight into the itinerary of that trip. We could then see what airline they flew on, when they flew, what hotel did they stay in when they got there, and did they have to rent a car when they were there? So by having this level of detail available in a dashboard, just think of what a manager or a cost center owner now could do. They would have visibility into the data that would be difficult or almost impossible to do in some of your source systems. Many of them don't give you an easy way to go and see, show me all of my employees that report to me. You'd have to go in potentially one by one and see what they're doing. But by bringing that information again onto a dashboard, it would be easier to do that. Here we're looking at some of the car rental data. We have a distribution of the countries, and as you would expect, car rentals are more prevalent in North America, and in particularly the US. But we now can start to see some things like, what are the rental rates and how do they compare by car types? As you know, luxury car is going to be more expensive per day than maybe a compact car. And so you can use that as setting some of your travel policies or recommendations for your employees. And you also use it as auditing for your travel policies. We now can see what the daily rates are by state, and you can see if going into one particular state versus another might potentially cost you more in your rental costs. And then we have some insight into those car companies. And with this information, we can use it for the vendor negotiations or determining, again, those recommendations for your employees. I'm sure that many of you haven't thought of looking at your hotel data this way. But with this dashboard, we can get a lot of insights into our hotel travel data. We can quickly see with the scatter plot, what are the most expensive cities to stay in, and how much have we spent in each of those? While Seattle is there really high in the middle, it's in the median from an average nightly rate. But as we scroll across the bottom, we can see it's really expensive when we start to get to London and Singapore and New York, and in particular, Dana Point. We also now can see the times of the year and how the rates are changing. If you were going to host an event, by knowing this information, you can decide it would be cheaper for our organization and anybody else that might be coming to that event if we hosted it in April versus maybe in September, just because of all the travel that's happening in those times of the year. And by this scatter plot, we can also get some insight into the hotel chains that we're typically using. And of course, with all the filtering, you'd be able to drill even farther into all of this. Now, in finance, we don't get a chance to play around with lat-long coordinates very often. And when the opportunity comes, jump on it. Okay? So in this air network map, we've supplemented the airport codes that were on our ticketing information with the lat-long coordinates. Now, the lat-long coordinates weren't available in Agencia, but there's a lot of public information that you can access, and we can show you one of those later, to get those lat-long coordinates. And by having those coordinates, we now can visualize the origins and the destinations. And by clicking on any of these data points, again, everything is going to filter. And so we now also have some amazing insight into our top market pairs. And by selecting on those, we would have additional insight and decisions that you could make. So this version of the air network map is slightly different. We've added the aspect of time. So now we can see not only when, but where our employees are traveling. And then we've broken up the travel into a variety of different regions there. When you build a published data source, or anything, right, you want to know if people are using it. So after we spent all this time on it, we had that same question. And thankfully, by using the published data source, there's insights that you can get from your Tableau server. So we have one published data source, and yes, there are over 130 workbooks that are using that published data source. Now, it seems like a lot, and it kind of is, but the reason why there's that many is the FP&A department created specific reports for different parts of the organization. So they weren't distracted by the marketing spend if they were in sales or in R&D. Not that they can't see all that information, but they just didn't need to be distracted by it. So there was a specific report for them, and then from time to time, there's going to be period-specific ones as well. So you can imagine one report kind of becomes maybe 4 for a year, and so some of that is just that. But one of the things or two of the things that we've done to be able to boost the adoption of this published data source was adding those lat-long coordinates for the airports. And then the second thing we did is you can imagine most of your expenses that are flowing through your GL are hitting some sort of cost center. And how many organizations only have one cost center? Or perhaps you have employees that report to you that are in multiple cost centers. And so one of the things that we did is we went in and grabbed our management hierarchy and appended that in with our data. So I can go in and I can quickly see all of the travel expenses that are related to my employees, regardless of the company, subsidiary, or department that they might be in. And I mentioned along the way, we learned some things, and I want to share those with you today. Determine what data you need. Right now, I said we're only using 3 of the travel types. We aren't grabbing the fees information yet or the train information that's relevant for Europe and Asia travel. But also you need to know the period of time that you want to be analyzing. If you only care about those 365 days, there's different decisions. But if you need 3 years, 4 years of data, then that's going to have some impact on decisions you make. And as I talked about earlier, make sure you have a strategy for your custom fields. Okay? So one of the other things that I didn't mention about the custom fields is not only if you rename them does it create a second column, but if that custom field is not used in the period of time that you run the report, that column won't appear in the report. So not only do we have column names changing, but often they just don't appear. And so again, those are things that we were able to solve by using that Alteryx workflow. And if you are going to move beyond a single instance of Agencia, make sure that you are exploring what's available through Agencia Global Reporting. We've only recently discovered some of the capabilities that it has, and we're now moving from, instead of having to download reports from 9 different sites, we're able to download a single report from one site that has the information for all 9 of them. So make sure you look into that. And from time to time, Agencia is adding some new fields. Some of that's coming from pressure from clients to say, hey, I really wish you could show me this piece of information, and so add it. Well, sometimes you don't know those things get added, so you just need to kind of continue to monitor for those and determine if it's something that you then need to bring into your process. And we're not done. We still have some manual steps in this process. While we've automated some things, we haven't been able to automate all of them. So we want to be able to download the CSV files more automated instead of us having to push a button. We want to be able to load the data into SQL Server automated. It's being automated through a script now, but we have to ask somebody to run it. And so we want to be able to take that process out of it. And then we're exploring some of these other things that are on the list. So I know I've talked about Agencia for a little while there, and it only applied to some of you. But again, hopefully it gave you a little bit of insight into some of the things that you can do with your Agencia data. So now I want to dive into what you can do with Concur. Go ahead.
Before we get to Concur, I'm not super familiar with Agencia. What stage of data is Agencia? Is that book data? Is that consumed data? Is that a mix of?
Think of Agencia as really as a corporate travel agent. So it's you booking an airline ticket, booking a reservation in a hotel, and so it's capturing that booking information, and then as long as you don't exchange it or refund it, then it's going to stay in that kind of.
Book a hotel at $200 a night, but when I get there, I'm going to upgrade at the desk to $300 a night. That's not going to show up in your Agencia data, right? That's just your book data.
It really all depends. There's a pretty good chance that it will change that reservation information and come through Agencia, or you may, as an employee, be responsible for that additional $100, and the company won't have to pay for it. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, let's keep going. We can answer some of those more questions as we get towards the end, just in the interest of time. So here we're going to talk a little bit about what you could do from the Concur side. So again, I talked to most of you, but another quick show of hands of how many of you are using Concur. All right, about what we expected, roughly 50%. Okay, so again, we don't expect that all of you are using Concur because you have a lot of choices. But I'm sure if you're not using Concur, you have some process or system in your organization that is allowing your employees to get reimbursed for their expenses or to book travel. So hopefully in this section, we'll give you some ways of thinking about that data. So just as we had with Agencia, we wanted everything out of Concur. And this is the solution that we implemented. We started using Concur in 2011, and we only put this solution in place this year. The Excel files right now are being emailed to us, and then we're just manually copying them down to the LAN. We then are kicking off the Alteryx workflow that's loading those files into an Access database, and then the Alteryx process is creating a TDE, or Tableau Data Extract, and then publishing it up to our Tableau server. So let's explore again some of the steps that you might take if you're going to go down this path with Concur. Now, if your company hasn't invested in the Concur API, this is the only way that you're going to be able to get your data. You're going to have to use their intelligence reporting platform to run a standard report or build your own custom report. You will be able to schedule it, and then you have to determine how you want to get that file. You have a couple of different options with Concur that you don't have with Agencia. You can manually download it, you can have it emailed to you, or you can use an FTP site. And if you use the FTP site, you will need to coordinate with Concur and getting all that set up and the security associated with it. And once you have the files, again, you're going to have to decide if there's anything you need to do with them to prepare them before you can process them or start your analytics. And again, hopefully you don't, but the only step that we have to take at this point is the manually copying and the renaming of them. We don't have to manipulate any of the columns, thankfully, in these files. And then you're going to have to decide whether you need to store the data. Again, this all depends on how much information you want to have. Concur does have a limit on kind of the number of transactions that you can export. We've kind of stumbled into around 200,000 records, and then you're not going to get all of your information. So you may have to parse your data up to make sure that you're getting all of it. Now, as a rapid prototype for us, we used Access. It was something that we had expertise in, and it was something that was easy for us to support, that we didn't have to get IT resources involved. And then once your Concur data is ready, you can start to analyze it inside of Tableau. So let's step through really quickly some of the examples that you can do with your Concur data. So in this dashboard, you have explore a level of detail that is not available most likely in your general ledger. You can see the spend categories of ground transportation, and then you'd be able to drill even farther into maybe how much you're spending on taxis and Ubers and also parking expenses. When you're dealing with expense reports, it's really critical as to how long it's taking for your employees to submit those reports. So this data shows that we definitely had an issue in the first 2 periods of the time that's reported here. And as you can see, though, we made some changes, and we were able to change the behavior of our employees. Delays in submitting your expense reports can result in the expenses hitting in the different accounting periods, the expenses not matching up to when you had planned or forecasted them, and trust me, it makes it a lot harder for the accountants in your organization to accrue these expenses. Now, this dashboard provides a starting point into the deeper analysis that you can do with your Concur data. It allows you to see what your top expense types are, who the top spenders by type are, and then with the scatter plot, we now can see some of the outliers. And as you hover in there, you can see that that employee spent close to $40,000 in personal expense. Perhaps it's time to get them a corporate credit card. Just as we had with the Agencia data, we wanted to monitor the usage. Here we have 3 published data sources instead of 1, and the number of workbooks that are being used in the views is a little bit lower. And the reason for that is because this data source is relatively new to us. We've only started using it this year. And also with our Concur data is there's information in Concur that's far more sensitive than the travel that's being booked in Agencia. Because depending on the type of expense that's being reimbursed by your employees, you may have employees that you've given authorization to get reimbursement for their cell phone expenses or to have their internet costs in their home office covered by your organization. That may not be something that's available to all of your employees, and you may not want to give visibility into that. And so because of that, some of the data in our data source is a little bit sensitive and the access has been limited. But just as we did with the Agencia data, we are also bringing in that manager hierarchy so that we can make it easier to look at the information. And as far as the lessons learned, make sure you determine what the data is you need. Can you use the standard reports, or are you going to need to build custom reports? And when you're dealing with the information coming out of Concur, you're going to have to deal with the state of the transactions being in different situations, kind of related to the question that you had. So has this transaction gone through all of the approval process and has now been extracted for payment? So the employee is now being reimbursed. Or is it still in processing? Because the difference in that will determine how you need to store the information, what information is still likely to change, and what information isn't. And then if you are going to build custom reports and you're not familiar with the reporting platform, I would encourage you to use their Concur reporting services. And then from the next steps, we want to bring in some of the travel information that we have in Concur, even though it's not our corporate travel agent. We want to bring in some of that workflow approval. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we do want to be exploring the Concur API. So as I promised, no trip is complete without something to take home. And we are super excited to announce the availability of our first Agencia and Concur starter workbooks. We have created 2 workbooks for each source system. And it's important to note that these were built in Tableau 10 so that we could leverage some of the features and capabilities of Tableau 10. So if your organization is not using Tableau 10, you can still download these, but you will need to install an additional version of Tableau to use them until your organization migrates. One of them is a sample workbook that we've preloaded with data for you to test with and explore. And then the other one will allow you to connect your data to it. And on this website that's here, we've also provided some step-by-step videos to help the setup process even easier. So as soon as you download the identified reports and the starter workbooks, you'll be able to begin to look at your data from a new perspective. So for a sneak peek into these starter workbooks, here's Dan.
All right, so our team's had a lot of fun building these workbooks, and it's my privilege to be able to share them with you today. So let's get started by diving into the Agencia Starter Workbook. The first tab we've introduced here is just the Agencia Data Dictionary, and so we can use this to traverse and search and learn a little more about the fields in Agencia, or if you know what field you're looking for, you could do a search for it. As we begin to explore our travel data, we'll start with a very high-level summary of our air, hotel, and car data. If I hover anywhere on these data points here, you can see we're prompted to interact with the viz. What happens when I click on Agent Assist? You'll notice everything in our dashboard is now filtered to only Agent Assist. Maybe instead of days advance purchase for air, maybe I want to see the transaction amount. And for hotel, instead of the transaction amount, maybe I want to see the average nightly rate. And for car, maybe I'm interested in seeing the transaction or the running sum of my transaction amount. So as we begin to dive deeper into our travel data, we'll start by looking at our air summary. Again, as I hover on these data points at the top, I'm again prompted to interact with the viz. As I click on domestic, everything in my view is now filtered down to domestic. And if I hover on one of these data points, we're presented with a definition of that field, in addition to a short narrative about that data point. If I select that data point, the view is further filtered so that now I'm only looking at domestic air travel that was booked 0 to 2 days in advance. And of course, there's a geo component to our air data as well. And so we've brought in the lat-long coordinates for all of our airports and plotted them on a flight origin and flight destination map. Let's say we're interested in looking at some of our top market pairs, maybe Austin to Seattle. Again, if I click on Austin to Seattle, everything in the view is now filtered according to that market pair. And very quickly, I can see that Alaska Airlines is my top airline vendor servicing that market pair. This dashboard gives us a means to control some of our air costs by looking how we're trending over time at things such as 0 to 2 day advance purchase windows, tickets purchased out of policy and the missed savings associated with that, or bookings that were made through Agent Assist versus online. I can filter down to a specific date period. Or maybe I'm interested in a specific traveler and I can select them from the list. Moving into hotel, you'll notice a similar look and feel as our air dashboard. Maybe I'm interested in looking at international hotel bookings that were made Agent Assist. As I make that selection, I immediately notice that my top out-of-policy reason were that in-policy hotels were not available. Maybe that's something I want to look into a little deeper. As with the air, there's a geo component to our hotel data as well. On the scatter plot here, what immediately jumps out to me is that independent, unaffiliated hotel chains seem to be an outlier. Let's see what happens when we filter those out. As I filter to only the affiliated hotel chains, I now see that Starwood, Marriott, and Global Hyatt are my top hotel chain vendors. If I'm interested in learning more about any of these, I can select, and everything in the dashboard is filtered according to my selection. I can see by country and state where travelers are staying in Starwood properties, in addition to the top cities that they're staying in. The last dashboard we'll look at related to Agencia is car. Let's say we're interested in doing employee level analysis on this dashboard. So I'll select an individual employee. Everything is filtered now to just car reservations made by that employee. We can see geographically where those car reservations were made, the top vendor and car types that were used. And so very quickly we can see that Avis seems to be much more expensive than Hertz. Our top out-of-policy reasons, and also the top cities that those car reservations were made. So we'll transition to the Concur workbook now, which more of you may be interested in. So the first dashboard we'll look at is expenses, and this dashboard may look familiar to one that Mike showed earlier. And so in the top left corner, we can see our top 5 expense types and how we're trending over time. But we can also see as a percentage how each of our top 5 expense types contribute to the total of all expenses. If I select any of these, all of the related data points with that travel type are highlighted for my attention. I can then highlight to learn a little bit more. And if I want to dive a layer deeper, I can select any data point or set of data points and jump to expense details. I'm now brought to a more traditional tabular view of my data with all the underlying details available to me. When I'm done here, I can hit the back button, and we'll jump back to our main dashboard. So Tableau 10 introduced highlighter functionality, and we've included a few of them on this dashboard to help us explore this data. As I browse through our expense types, you'll notice everything on the left is highlighting according to my selection. If at any point something piques my interest, I can make a selection and again hover to learn more details. Alternatively, I can also select individual employees on this view, and only their data points will be brought and highlighted for my attention. We'll move on to the hotel dashboard. Let's say for hotel, I'm interested in looking at hotel bookings made in the United States. And further, maybe I'm interested in focusing on Texas. As I select my Texas-related data points, you'll notice my employee list is now filtered according to that selection, and the scatter plot is highlighted according as well. And just like functionality on the last dashboard, I can hover and select any data point and jump to more details. When I'm done, I can hit the back button and go back to my main dashboard. We've also included a couple highlighters on this view to help you explore your hotel data. The last dashboard that we're going to go over is the air dashboard. And on this dashboard, we introduce a days in advance target parameter. And this parameter is defining the number of days in advance that a ticket must be purchased to not be flagged in the dashboards. Currently, this value is set to 14. If I set this value to 21, what we're saying are that any air bookings made 21 days or more in advance are acceptable. In the top view, I can see by week not only how much we've spent in air travel, but also how we're tracking against that days in advance target we've set, represented by this reference line. In the bottom, we can see the percentage of total tickets that were purchased. In red are those tickets that were purchased outside of that days in advance target booking window we've set. And just like the two other dashboards, we can select and jump to see all of the detail. When I'm done, I can go back to my main dashboard. I can also select individual employees. And so as I select this employee, I can see in what weeks air was purchased, how many days in advance those tickets were booked, and also some context about how they sit in context of the rest of the company's bookings. And so those are the starter workbooks. I'm going to hand it back to Mike, and he's going to wrap it up for us.
Thanks, Dan. So we began this trip looking at the T&E aggregation funnel and the level of detail that's available in our GL and the impact that has on the questions that we can answer. We then explored how you could get to your data from the source systems to answer more of your questions. And with these answers, your organization will have the information it needs to control costs and to measure the impact of your decisions. And to help all of you start your own journey with your Agencia and Concur data, we unveiled the new starter workbooks. By having and understanding our T&E data, we've been able to reduce our operating costs, and hopefully you can too. So we did this session yesterday as well as today, so if you don't like the comments I made today, you can maybe watch the video from yesterday. But also, if any of your coworkers weren't able to attend any of these sessions, make sure that you have them go and check out the TCC Live and watch these recordings after the conference. Now, some of these sessions have already happened, but if they haven't, you would be able to, again, explore these through the TC Live app and be able to watch these at a later time. Now, as you can imagine, Tableau loves data. And Dan and I would really like to know how we can make this session better. So please take a couple of minutes, whether it's now or between sessions, and really fill out the survey because we'd really appreciate the information. So I'm going to step through these slides really quick because I don't really here to talk about them, but I want to make this information available to all of you to review after the conference in the recording. So I've had the fortune of talking at the conference for the last 3 years, and here are the sessions that I did on the broader use of Tableau inside of finance organizations. So if there's others in your organization who would like to know about how to analyze your budget or look at your accounts receivable and purchasing information, there's some really good examples that are in these presentations. I also have the opportunity to participate in webinars. Tableau does Tableau and Tableau webinars every quarter, and just a couple of weeks ago I did one on finance. And so if you navigate to this website, you'll be able to watch the webinar that I did and also have access to a published workbook that is story points that give you examples of a lot of different things you could be doing in your finance organization. Now, not all of our customers are able to participate in webinars or talk at conference, but some of their stories have been captured and are available to all of you to view on our website. If any of you are looking to use Selenium or Python as a means of grabbing information from websites, here's some sample code that might be able to help you get started. And then here are some of the challenges that we encountered when we were building out our Agencia solution, and then some of the challenges that we incurred with Concur. So before we wrap things up, hopefully we can spend just a couple of minutes now answering any questions that you guys might have. Please. Yeah, so the question is about data is coming from your expense reimbursement system. It's also coming from others into your general ledger, and how you kind of tying all that information together. We're just kind of starting that, especially with us just recently having access to all of the Concur data. So we haven't really solved it yet, but it is the next part on our journey is to get that holistic view of what is coming through Agencia and what is coming through Concur, and trying to bring all that information together to make sure that we're not double paying for events, and we can have better insight into all of that. So the question was asking whether Alteryx can basically kind of parse out information in strings. Yeah, Alteryx as well as Tableau can do features like that. Yes, please.
How do you deal with access control?
Access control. Well, as you probably can tell at Tableau, we have access to a lot of information. And Tableau's kind of done that on purpose. I mean, we almost consider every employee an insider. And so we have access probably to information that most organizations don't allow their employees to see. And that's partly just because it's the culture of our organization. But we do recognize there is sensitive information. Not everybody has access to the entire forecast and the budget of the organization and particular aspects of it. And as I mentioned with the Concur data, there are things that are flowing through expense reimbursement that we don't necessarily want everyone to see, whether it's something related to an executive or some special events. And so we're managing that in a variety of different ways. Some of it's through the permissioning that we give to that published data source on Tableau server. Some of it's through the workbooks and then the permissioning that we're doing at that level. So we're handling it in a couple of different ways. But.
Is row-level security on the roadmap, or?
Well, lower level security is available today. You use it through what's called user filtering. It takes some work to do it inside of Tableau, and then depending on what your backend databases are, you have solutions that are available for you there as well. So if you can get your credentials all the way down to your underlying systems, like using tools like Kerberos, you would be able to then say, Mike can only see these transactions and stuff like that. So there's a variety of different solutions, and I don't claim to be an expert on them, but anyone else? All right, so I'll wrap things up really quick, and so you guys can get on. So it's been an honor to share our story with all of you. If there's anything else that Dan or I can do or Tableau can do to help your organizations, please let us know. Thanks for coming, and enjoy the rest of your conference, and safe travels.